The entire village of Mfeza gathered at the edge of the cliff, their faces twisted in horror as they watched Thandiwe standing on the precipice, her arms spread wide like a bird preparing for flight. 50 feet below, the Shire River churned with violent rapids that had claimed 3 lives in the past year alone. The morning sun cast her silhouette against the pale sky, and in her trembling hand, she clutched a crumpled letter stained with tears. "Thandiwe, please. Come down," her mother Alanave screamed from the crowd, her voice breaking with anguish. But Thandiwe didn't move. Her eyes were fixed on something far beyond the horizon, beyond the village, beyond Malawi itself. The wind whipped her colorful chitenge cloth around her legs, and for a moment, everyone held their breath, certain they were about to witness a tragedy. Chief Bonda pushed through the crowd, his weathered face pale with fear. "Where is he? Where is that foreigner who brought this curse upon us?" he demanded, his voice booming across the gathering. The villagers murmured in agreement, their anger rising like smoke from a fire. Some blamed the white man who had arrived 6 months ago. Others blamed Thandiwe for falling in love with someone who could never truly belong to their world. But what they didn't know, what none of them could possibly understand, was the secret that Thandiwe carried in that letter. A secret so devastating, so impossible to believe, that it had driven her to this cliff's edge. A secret that would change everything they thought they knew about love, loyalty, and the price of following your heart in a world determined to keep you bound by tradition. As Thandiwe's foot slipped on the loose rocks, sending pebbles tumbling into the abyss below, she closed her eyes and whispered a name that the wind carried away. And in that moment, everything that had led to this terrible morning flashed through her mind. Beginning 6 months earlier, Thandiwe had been walking home from the borehole, a clay pot of water balanced perfectly on her head, when she heard the sputtering engine die. She watched as a dusty white pickup truck rolled to a stop near the acacia tree that marked the boundary of her family's land. The door opened, and out stepped a man unlike anyone she had ever seen in Mfeza village. His name was Daniel, and he was a researcher from America, studying traditional farming methods across southern Africa. His skin was pale, burned red by the Malawian sun despite the hat he wore, and his Chichewa was broken but earnest. "Moni, Moni," he called out, waving awkwardly. "Truck, not working. Can you help?" Thandiwe should have walked away. Her father, Joseph, had always warned her about outsiders. "They come, they take what they want, and they leave," he would say, his voice heavy with the wisdom of someone who had seen too many promises broken. But something in Daniel's smile, something in the way he looked genuinely helpless and humble, made her set down her water pot. "I will fetch my brother," she said in English, surprising herself with her confidence. She had learned the language from the missionaries who ran the school, but rarely had the chance to use it. "He knows about engines." Daniel's face lit up with relief and gratitude. That was the first time their eyes truly met, and Thandiwe felt something shift inside her chest, like a door opening in a room she didn't know existed. Her brother Chisomo fixed the truck, but Daniel returned the next day with gifts, salt, sugar, and soap for her mother. Then he returned again, asking permission to interview her father about indigenous crop rotation methods. Then again, bringing books for the children. Each visit lasted a little longer. Each conversation went a little deeper. By the second month, Daniel had become a familiar sight in Mfeza. He learned to greet the elders properly, participated in village meetings, and even helped dig a new well near the school. The children followed him everywhere, practicing their English and laughing at his attempts to play bawo, the traditional board game he could never quite master. And Thandiwe found herself thinking about him constantly. The way he listened when she spoke, truly listened, as if her words held the secrets of the universe. The way he saw her not as just another village girl destined for an arranged marriage, but as someone with dreams, ideas, and a mind that deserved to be heard. He asked her about her life, her hopes, her fears, and he shared his own in return. They began meeting secretly by the mango tree near the river, away from the prying eyes of villagers who had already started to whisper. Daniel told her about New York City, about buildings that touched the sky, and trains that ran underground. Thandiwe told him about her dream of becoming a teacher, of opening a school where girls wouldn't be. The trouble began when Fatso saw them together. He had gone to the river to fish and stumbled upon Thandiwe and Daniel sitting beneath the mango tree, their shoulders almost touching, their laughter carried on the evening breeze. And Fatso's face had darkened with rage, not just because his promised bride was with another man, but because that man was a foreigner, an outsider who had no right to even look at a daughter of Mfeza. Within hours, the entire village knew. By morning, Thandiwe's father Joseph stood in their small courtyard, his face harder than she had ever seen it. "You have brought shame upon this family," he said, his voice low and controlled, which somehow made it worse than if he had shouted. "Mfatso's family is demanding compensation. They say you have ruined their son's honor." "But father, I don't love Mfatso," Thandiwe pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "Daniel and we only talk. We are friends. Nothing improper has happened." "Friends?" Her father's voice rose now, shaking with anger and disappointment. "A young woman does not have male friends, especially not foreign men who will leave when their work is done. You are promised Mfatso. That is the end of this discussion." Alanef, her mother, stood in the doorway, wringing her hands. "Joseph, perhaps we should listen to." "Silence, woman. This is what happens when girls are allowed too much education, too much freedom. She has forgotten who she is, forgotten our ways." He turned back to Thandiwe, his eyes cold. "You will not see this American again. You will marry Mfatso in 2 weeks as planned. If you refuse, you will be cast out. No daughter of mine will disgrace this family further." Thandiwe ran to her small room and wept until she had no tears left. That night, she managed to send word to Daniel through her younger sister, Chipo, who was still innocent enough not to understand the gravity of what was happening. They met one last time, deep in the night at their spot by the mango tree. The moon hung low and full, casting silver light across Daniel's anguished face. "Come with me," he said urgently, taking both her hands in his. "Come to America. I'll help you finish your education. You can become the teacher you've always dreamed of being. We can be together." Thandiwe's heart soared and shattered in the same moment. "Daniel, I cannot. If I leave, my family will be ruined. The shame would be unbearable. My father could be expelled from the village council. My sisters would never find husbands. And Mfatso's family, they might demand such compensation that we would lose our land." "Then I'll stay," Daniel said desperately. "I'll speak to your father. I'll pay whatever bride price is required. I'll convert, follow your traditions, do whatever it takes." "You would give up everything? Your work, your family, your country?" Thandiwe searched his face in the moonlight. "Daniel, your research grant ends in 3 weeks. You have a life waiting for you back home. A real life, not this, not us." "You are my real life," he whispered fiercely. "I love you, Thandiwe. I think I've loved you since that first day when you set down your water pot to help a foolish foreigner with a broken truck." Those were the words that sealed their fate. Because at that moment, hidden in the shadows of the trees, Mfatso stood watching them, his hands clenched into fists. And beside him was his uncle, a member of the traditional council, whose power in the village was second only to Chief Bonda himself. The next morning, the entire village was summoned. Chief Bonda stood before them, his ceremonial leopard skin draped across his shoulders, his face grave. "A crime has been committed," he announced. "Our traditions have been—" Thandiwe's foot slipped again, and a collective gasp rose from the crowd. But it was a different voice that stopped her, a voice that shouldn't have been there, that couldn't possibly be there. "Thandiwe, don't." She turned, and there he was, Daniel, running through the crowd, his face streaked with tears and dust. Behind him came another figure, a Malawian woman in her 50s, dignified and beautiful, wearing traditional dress. The crowd parted in confusion as Daniel reached the cliff's edge, stopping a careful distance away, his hands raised in a gesture of peace and desperation. "Please," he panted, exhausted from what must have been a frantic journey. "Let me explain. Let everyone hear the truth." Chief Bonda stepped forward, his face thunderous. "You were banished. How dare you return? Because the letter I sent was incomplete. Daniel interrupted, his voice stronger now despite his fear. Because Thandiwe only knows half the story, and I couldn't let her make this choice without knowing everything. Thandiwe's mother Alanef moved closer, her voice breaking. What letter? Thandiwe, what did it say? Thandiwe's hand trembled as she held up the crumpled paper. Her voice was hollow, defeated. He's dying. Daniel has a disease, something wrong with his heart. The doctors gave him 6 months. He wrote to say goodbye, to tell me he was sorry for making me love him when he knew he had no future to offer. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. He said I should marry Mfatso and forget him, that it was better this way. But how can I marry another man when my heart is buried with someone who's leaving this world? The crowd erupted in shocked whispers, but Daniel was shaking his head vigorously. No, no. Thandiwe, I need you to read the second page. There was a second page. There was no second page, Thandiwe said, confusion cutting through her despair. Daniel turned to the woman beside him. This is Dr. Chimamanda. She's a cardiologist from Lilongwe, and she's also the chief's younger sister. Chief Banda's eyes widened in recognition. Chimama? But you left the village 30 years ago. I left to study medicine, brother, Dr. Banda said, her voice gentle but firm. And I came back because this young man found me. Because he needed help, yes, but also because he wanted to prove something to you, to all of us. Daniel took a shaky breath. The letter was supposed to have 2 pages. The first explained my illness, yes. But the second page, Thandiwe, the second page said that Dr. Banda believes she can treat it. That I have hope. And more than that, I wrote about my decision. He took a cautious step closer. I wrote that I'm not going back to America. I've resigned from my position. I've sold everything I own. Because I realized something in these weeks away from you. He looked directly at Thandiwe now, and despite everything, despite the crowd and the cliff and the impossible situation, his eyes held nothing but love and certainty. Home isn't a country or a building that touches the sky. Home is wherever you are. I want to build a life here in Malawi, in this village, if they'll have me. Not as a researcher or an outsider, but as someone who belongs. I want to learn your language properly, follow your customs, earn my place through work and respect. He glanced at Chief Banda. And I want to ask your father, properly and traditionally, for permission to court you. To prove that my intentions are honorable, that my love is real. The crowd was silent now, hanging on every word. Even Fatso had gone still, his anger replaced by something else, something that might have been reluctant understanding. Dr. Banda spoke again, addressing her brother and the assembled villagers. I left this village because I wanted to pursue dreams that seemed impossible for a woman. Our father told me I was abandoning my culture, my people. But I never abandoned them. I carried them with me, and I used my education to help thousands of Malawians. She paused, letting her words sink in. Tradition is important. It's the foundation of who we are. But tradition that doesn't bend becomes tradition that breaks. And breaking loses us our brightest daughters and sons. Chief Banda stood silent for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he looked at his sister, at Daniel, at Thandiwe still standing on the cliff's edge, and finally at the crowd of his people. 30 years ago, I let anger and pride drive my sister away. I told myself I was protecting our traditions, but perhaps I was just afraid of change. He turned to Dr. Banda, approached Thandiwe, taking her hands. I left to pursue my dreams, child. But I always wondered if I'd lost something essential in the process. Watching you and Daniel, seeing how you're trying to build a bridge between 2 worlds rather than abandoning one for the other, it gives me hope. Hope that maybe the next generation will be wiser than mine was. Over the following months, Daniel did exactly as Joseph had challenged him to do. He cleared the land, his pale skin growing darker under the African sun, his soft hands developing calluses. The village men, initially skeptical, began to respect his determination. He learned to plow with oxen, to read the reins, to speak Chichewa with increasing fluency. He attended village meetings, contributed to community projects, and slowly, gradually, stopped being seen as a foreigner and started being seen simply as Daniel, the hard-working man courting Joseph's daughter. Thandiwe, for her part, began teaching at the village school, implementing the ideas she had discussed with Daniel during their secret meetings. She created a program specifically for girls, showing them that marriage didn't have to mean the end of education or dreams. Dr. Bonda remained in the area, establishing a clinic that served Mfeza and 3 neighboring villages. She and Daniel worked together to create health education programs, blending traditional healing knowledge with modern medicine. Chief Bonda, reconciled with his sister after 3 decades, became one of the program's strongest advocates. And when the harvest came in, abundant and rich, Joseph stood in the field with Daniel and finally smiled. "You've proven yourself, young man. You've earned the right to speak your heart." The wedding that eventually took place was unlike any Mfeza village had ever seen. It honored every traditional custom, with Daniel learning the ceremonial dances and paying the bride price he had worked a full year to earn. But it also included elements from Daniel's culture, a blending that symbolized what their life together would be. As Thandiwe and Daniel stood together before the village, Chief Bonda spoke words that would be remembered long after that day. "This is not a story of tradition defeated or foreign influence corrupting our ways. This is a story of love proving strong enough to build bridges instead of walls. May we all learn from their example." Years later, when people told the story of Thandiwe and Daniel, they didn't focus on the differences that had nearly torn them apart. Instead, they spoke of the morning when an entire village stood at a cliff's edge and chose understanding over fear, love over rigid tradition, and hope over despair. They spoke of how sometimes the most beautiful love stories are the ones that teach us that home isn't where you're from, but where you choose to build your life, and with whom you choose to build it. And when Thandiwe's daughters, growing up in a village forever changed by their parents' courage, asked how their mother and father met, Thandiwe would smile and say, "It started with a broken truck and a pot of water." But really, it started with 2 people brave enough to see beyond what they were told was possible. Now, if you've made it this far in our story, we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. We love connecting with viewers from around the world, and it's amazing to see how stories of love and courage resonate across borders. Have you ever had to choose between tradition and following your heart? What would you have done in Thandiwe's position? Or in Daniel's?